It starts with a smoothie, a seemingly harmless act of love, until the cup becomes a weapon. In March 2023, Angela Craig, a devoted mother of 6, began growing ill. Headaches, nausea, dizziness, legitimate symptoms, until doctors revealed they were caused by poison. And the person she trusted most was its architect. Angela Craig was no risk-taker, a local choir director and genealogy consultant, deeply embedded in her community and faith. Her siblings describe her as confident, caring, unshakably maternal. She loved being a mother more than anything. When defense attorneys suggested she might have taken her own life, her brother Mark delivered a searing rebuke under oath. There's only one person in the world who would say she was suicidal, and that person is the one who murdered her. But family was only one piece of a puzzle rapidly dissolving into dread. Forensic investigators found a secret history of search terms on Craig's office computer. How long to die from arsenic? Is undetectable poison real? How make a murder look like a heart attack? Toxicology would later confirm lethal levels of arsenic and cyanide in Angela's system, along with tetrahydrozoline from over-the-counter eye drops. Drugs normally so mundane, save for the man behind them. In court, Angela's daughter Miriam read a victim impact statement that tinged every word with heartbreak. She had trusted her dad. He was supposed to be her hero. Instead, he became the villain in her story. She spoke of shattered routines, the dreams her mom would never see realized. Weddings, grandchildren, retirement plans. And all she was left doing was taking her father home, without her mother there to lean on. Her grief was raw. Her words echoed like a dirge. But the pieces weren't only emotional, they were technical. Surveillance video captured James mixing something in the kitchen at 3:23 a.m. on March 6. The pink-lidded cup again. That same day, Angela complained, her husband's voice heard in background footage. "You look kind of pale, you okay?" She answered, "It's your fault they treated me like a suicidal risk." A confrontation caught on home cameras. The same man painting a narrative of her instability while feeding her poison. Then came her final hospital admission. She spent 10 days hospitalized, her symptoms accelerating. Seizures, brain swelling, declining vital signs, and each visit brought Craig nearer to his greatest manipulation. On March 15th or 16th, surveillance footage showed him leaving her ICU room, carrying something small and clear. Minutes later, she convulsed. Then came photos of Craig, holding a syringe. Not a caring husband, a calculated killer. As doctors began identifying cyanide in her blood and failing to locate any history of suicidal ideation, Angela's phone records, journal notes, and family testimonies told a different story than Craig claimed. A phone note he wrote at 10:03 a.m. on March 16th attempted to lay out a scenario where Angela supposedly wanted poison to die, to drive into pylons, to end her life. But it didn't align with forensic evidence. The detective called his narrative inconsistent. His browsing history displayed searches that Angela never performed. His stories contradicted his own alibis, and his calm, sterile demeanor in the ICU stood at odd odds with grief. The real shock came when prosecutors revealed a motive for $1 million in life insurance policies. And as Angela lay dying, Craig was allegedly messaging his new lover, a Texas orthodontist, with promises of future travel and escape. In court, text logs showed over 4,000 messages exchanged in just 18 days, including declarations like, "Angela thinks I did this to her," and "I would never drug you." Love bombing, gaslighting, the archetype of narcissistic control. Before the trial even ended, another shockwave, jailhouse letters. Pages outlining murder for hire, offers to fabricate false testimony, bribes, threats, even asking an inmate to fake a deepfake video or plant a forged journal in Craig's house. He sought alibi witnesses, beautiful women aged 25 to 45, to claim affairs, to shift blame. It wasn't just murder. It was performance, manipulation, premeditation, crafted from a jail cell. Angela Craig's death was initially ruled mysterious, until her closest friends began to speak. It wasn't just her deteriorating health that concerned them. It was the way her life began to change months before she landed in a hospital bed. One friend in particular, Nicole Harmon, had been by Angela's side for nearly 2 decades. She was more than a friend. She was a witness, a mirror to Angela's emotional unraveling. And in court, she made it clear Angela didn't just die. She was isolated, manipulated, and, perhaps most tragically, unheard. Nicole told the jury about a conversation that haunted her. One day, during what seemed like an innocent catch-up, James Craig casually admitted to something that left her cold. He said he once drugged Angela to make sure she wouldn't wake up while he tried to kill himself. It wasn't said in anguish or regret. It was recounted with eerie detachment. The remark stuck in Nicole's mind for years. She didn't know what to make of it at the time. But when Angela's symptoms began and her marriage spiraled further, it all came rushing back. Nicole confronted Angela. She asked if she was okay. Angela was hurt, not just by the comment, but by the realization that her husband had confided something so disturbing to someone else. The confrontation strained their friendship, but beneath the tension, there was something darker. Angela was starting to feel like a prisoner in her own home. She confided in Nicole about the shake. Yes, the smoothie. It was one of several drinks James would prepare for her, always on mornings when she felt most ill. On one such day in early March 2023, Angela said the shake tasted strange. Hours later, she was vomiting uncontrollably. And it wasn't just Nicole. Another close friend revealed that Angela had been researching marital counseling options and had even booked sessions. But James Craig wasn't interested in saving the marriage. His sights were set elsewhere, on other women, other lives, a future without Angela. By the time Angela entered the hospital on March 15th, her body had already endured weeks of exposure to toxic substances. Kristen Abacan, a nurse at the University of Colorado Hospital, was on duty when Angela arrived in the ICU. She described her as severely ill, almost non-responsive. Angela didn't leave the ICU that day, or ever again. Her condition was so advanced that doctors immediately suspected irreversible brain damage. What struck Abacan wasn't just Angela's condition. It was James's behavior. There was no urgency, no fear. He stood back, silent. She said she had never seen a spouse so disengaged. When a doctor delivered the grim news that Angela was likely brain dead, James barely reacted. He didn't cry. He didn't question. He didn't even ask what could be done. Another doctor, a pulmonologist named Dr. Sotil, testified that James agreed to remove Angela from life support almost immediately. No second opinions. No hesitation. According to Dr. Sotil, discussions like this normally take hours, sometimes days, as spouses and families grapple with loss. But James acted as though the decision had already been made. Then came ER nurse Michelle Root, who described a moment few in the courtroom would forget. As hospital staff worked to stabilize Angela, James stood in the hallway, not pacing, not praying, but calmly taking photos. Root testified that she'd never seen a spouse take pictures of their loved one during an emergency, not once in her career. It was chilling. As Angela's circle of friends and family painted a picture of a loving mother and loyal wife, prosecutors introduced someone else, someone from the other side of James Craig's double life. Kristen Sorensen, the Texas orthodontist, had met James just weeks before Angela's death. Their relationship, as she described it, began innocently at a dental conference in Las Vegas. Both were going through divorces, or so James claimed. He said his marriage was over. He said Angela had attempted suicide multiple times, that she was unstable, that he was finally ready to start fresh. Their affair took off with breathtaking speed. Over 4,000 text messages exchanged in less than 3 weeks. Long FaceTime calls. Swapping stories of heartbreak and vulnerability. Sorensen was newly separated and emotionally raw. James was charming, confident, attentive. It felt like serendipity. But beneath the flurry of affection was something else. A script. James Craig began feeding her stories, subtle at first, about Angela's mental health. That she was fragile. That she'd begged for sedatives from his dental office. That she was, as he put it, slowly falling apart. The red flags were there. But love bombing has a way of blinding its victims. Then came a message that, in retrospect, chilled Sorensen to her core. Angela thinks I did this to her, Craig wrote. Just for the record, I would never drug you. Why? She wondered, would he say that? What was he trying to prepare her for? As prosecutors peeled back the layers of Craig's deception, they introduced forensic toxicologist Dr. David Paynes. His findings confirmed what Angela's friends and family had feared. She had been poisoned systematically. Her blood contained high concentrations of arsenic and cyanide, substances rarely found in such levels outside industrial or intentional contexts. There was no environmental explanation, no chance of accidental ingestion. Tetrahydrozoline was also present in her system. This compound, used in common eye drops, can be deadly in large doses. It slows heart rate and breathing and can mimic symptoms of a stroke or cardiac event. It's not easily traceable, at least not without looking for it. Dr. Paynes explained that the timeline of her symptoms, headaches, nausea, muscle weakness, aligned perfectly with repeated low-dose poisonings. Not a single event, not a suicide, but a slow, orchestrated assault. The defense tried to argue that grief manifests differently for everyone, that James's behavior, while unusual, didn't prove guilt. But each friend, each nurse, each medical professional kept bringing the same chilling theme to light: indifference, cold calculation, and in some moments, something resembling anticipation. Angela Craig was deteriorating before their eyes, and the man at her side seemed less like a grieving husband and more like someone watching a plan unfold. And just when it seemed the courtroom had heard the worst of it, prosecutors dropped a bombshell. James Craig, even behind bars, hadn't stopped trying to control the narrative. What came next would send the case spiraling in a direction no one saw coming. She met him in a dinner line. A crowded dental conference in Las Vegas. Bright lights, polished charm, the casual small talk of two professionals trying to distract themselves from real-life pain. She was finalizing a divorce after nearly 30 years. He said he was in one too. That's how it began. But what started as a flirty conversation quickly spiraled into something darker. Fast. Too fast. The Texas orthodontist had no idea what she was walking into when she exchanged numbers with James Craig in February of 2023. Within days, there were calls, FaceTimes, love notes, more than 4,000 text messages in just 18 days. James told her he was separated, that his wife was suicidal, that he was worried for her safety. He told stories of sedatives from his dental office, of a marriage long dead. It was a flood of affection so overwhelming that she didn't have time to question it. That's how love bombing works. She was vulnerable. He was attentive. She fell. At first, he seemed gentle, empathetic, a fellow traveler through heartbreak. But red flags were piling up. The relationship was moving at breakneck speed. His stories didn't add up. He'd say things, then say the opposite days later. He said Angela tried to overdose on sedatives. Then he said she didn't. He said he was planning a divorce. Then said he might stay for the kids. As Angela lay in a hospital bed, organs failing, her husband was texting another woman with sweet nothings. "I would never drug you," he told the orthodontist. "Angela thinks I did this to her." That last one broke her. On the stand, she held her chest and choked through tears, confessing she no longer knew what was real, that she had loved a man who never really existed. But the betrayal didn't stop there. James Craig didn't just want affection. He wanted image, control, performance. That's why prosecutors say he hired a prostitute in Las Vegas while simultaneously texting the Texas dentist about his dying wife. Two realities. One man, the orthodontist, didn't know she was one of several. The courtroom held its breath as she testified, describing intimate conversations at the Bellagio, confessions exchanged under the glow of chandeliers, and how it all unraveled in the cold, clinical atmosphere of a murder trial. She had once imagined a future with him. Now she stared at him from the witness stand, a man accused of poisoning his wife to chase a fantasy. James never looked at her once. She wasn't the only woman in the shadows of his lies. Another testified that she met James through a dating app. She described burner phones, sexual encounters, gifts, discussions of marriage, all while knowing he was married. She said he talked about how to kill someone using potassium because it was hard to trace. Another woman, still, said he dangled promises but vanished by February, just as Angela's symptoms grew worse. Every story was a thread, each one unraveling a tapestry of duplicity, financial manipulation, emotional triangulation, love layered with lies. It was as though James Craig had split himself into versions, a devoted husband in one narrative, a romantic widower in another, a predator in all. The patterns weren't just reckless. They were orchestrated. As a Texas orthodontist left a witness box, the jurors had seen not just one broken woman, but the echo of many, each one seduced by a man who played the part of rescuer, only to reveal himself as a storm. And outside that courtroom, the question lingered. How many more stories would have unraveled if Angela hadn't died? The prosecution didn't need to guess, because inside James Craig's jail cell, they'd found a letter, one that would make everything darker still. It wasn't just a murder. It was a blueprint. Weeks into the trial, the courtroom froze as prosecutors revealed a letter, 11 pages, handwritten, pulled from beneath a jail bunk during a covert sweep. A letter that would rip the floor out from under any defense of innocence. The letter wasn't a cry for help. It was a plan, a calculated strategy from a man sitting in jail, accused of murdering his wife, who was still trying to write the script to his own story. It opened with a plea. I've been unjustly accused of a horrible crime. I must fight fire with fire. But those weren't the words of a desperate man. They were the words of a manipulator trying to bend reality around his will. Inside the letter, James Craig outlined 4 steps to clear his name. First, recruit fake witnesses to say Angela was suicidal. Second, destroy the reputation of the lead investigator by planting damaging background stories. Third, bribe participants with tens of thousands of dollars to lie under oath. Fourth, and most disturbing, arrange a hit on that same criminal investigator. He even gave instructions. You essentially have a blank check, he wrote, offering $20,000 per fabricated witness. He gave creative freedom to the participants. He said they could improvise, add details, make it believable, as if this were theater, as if human lives were part of production, and he was the director. But this wasn't fiction. It was blood. It was real. Craig wasn't just trying to escape prison. He was building a world where the truth would never reach the surface. A world where Angela was unstable, where he was a loving husband, where the detectives were corrupt, and where beautiful women would lie to save him. He instructed one jailhouse contact to find attractive women aged 25 to 45 who would claim they'd been having affairs with him starting around Christmas of 2022. His plan? Paint a story that Angela discovered the cheating, fell into despair, and took her own life. But it didn't stop there. One inmate testified that Craig gave him a hand-drawn map of his home. He wanted the man to break in and plant a forged journal suggesting Angela had suicidal thoughts. The inmate destroyed the map, but turned the rest over to law enforcement. He said he was horrified, that even among criminals, this felt monstrous. Another inmate said Craig wanted to use AI to create a deepfake video, one where Angela could be seen expressing suicidal ideation. He was inventing evidence, script-writing a tragedy, building a digital ghost of his wife to blame in death. The testimonies from those inmates were damning, each one layered with the same disturbing theme. James Craig didn't just want to escape justice. He wanted to rewrite the narrative completely, and he was willing to do it from behind bars, using whoever he could manipulate. Ex-cons, ex-wives, strangers, all pawns in his performance. Then came the note found on his iPhone, a carefully written document from March 16th, just a day after Angela's final collapse. In it, Craig claimed Angela had asked him to help her die, that she wanted cyanide, that she talked about crashing her car, that she wanted his help researching poisons. But forensic investigators had already seen the real data. Angela hadn't searched a single thing about poison. He had, repeatedly, for months. And as for her suicidal thoughts, there were none, not in journals, not in therapy notes, not in conversations with friends or family, only in Craig's story. In that jailhouse letter, Craig painted himself as a victim, a father fighting to return to his children. He ended the note with a chilling line, "Thank you in advance for making me and my kids the happiest people on earth." But outside his cell, the world was beginning to see something far different. Not a father, not a husband, but a man who viewed people as tools, love as leverage, and murder as a narrative waiting to be controlled. It was no longer about a poison smoothie. It was about a poisoned soul, one that would rather burn everything than lose control of the story. She walked into the courtroom like someone stepping out of a fog, a Texas orthodontist, composed, poised, until the memories returned. The whirlwind romance, the thousands of messages, the declarations of love whisper across FaceTime calls. She thought she'd met a man who understood her, a dentist like herself, charming, articulate, wounded by a difficult marriage. But now she sat across from him, under oath, realizing she might have fallen in love with a killer. It began at a dental conference in Las Vegas, February 2023. She had just finalized her divorce. James Craig said he was going through one too. He was living separately. He was trying to start over. They met in a dinner line, exchanged stories, bonded quickly. He listened. He shared. He knew exactly how to mirror her vulnerability. That's what predators do best. He told her about his wife, Angela, that she was suicidal, that she'd tried before, that she was unstable. He painted himself as a calm in a storm, and she believed him, because the messages were constant, because love, when weaponized, feels like security, even when it's a trap. In less than 3 weeks, they exchanged over 4,000 messages. He told her he loved her, that they had a future, that she was his light. But while Angela Craig lay hospitalized, seizing from cyanide poisoning, James was texting the other woman about future vacations, freedom, and what came next. She recalled how he told her Angela thought he was drugging her. And then came a message that stopped everyone cold. Just for the record, I would never drug you. The defense tried to make this a love story, but all anyone could see now was grooming, control, and psychological warfare. She broke down on the stand. Her hand trembled over her chest as prosecutors revealed the timeline. The messages overlapped with Angela's hospitalizations, with the search history, with the purchase of cyanide, with the poisonings. Her entire affair with James Craig was unfolding while he was allegedly plotting his wife's death. But she wasn't the only one. 2 other women testified about their romantic entanglements with Craig. One admitted she knew he was married. Another described him as emotionally needy. Both mentioned how quickly things escalated. Love turned obsession, charm into control. Craig had juggled multiple women, each one manipulated, none fully aware of the darkness beneath the smile. Then came the most disturbing revelation. He had hired a Las Vegas prostitute during the same dental conference where he met the Texas orthodontist. It wasn't just deceit, it was compulsion. And it underscored a theme the prosecution would return to again and again: Craig's need for attention, for admiration, for power over others. These weren't just flings. They were chess moves. A man unraveling, grabbing for validation while his life collapsed under mounting debt, professional scrutiny, and a crumbling marriage. And while Angela tried to save their relationship, tried to forgive, Craig was already replacing her. What made the testimony of the Texas dentist so devastating wasn't just a betrayal. It was a moment she admitted, "Today, I don't know anything." A woman once convinced she knew the man in front of her, now staring across the courtroom into the face of a stranger. Her tears weren't just for the lies. They were for the realization that she had been complicit in a narrative she never understood. This chapter in the trial turned the focus inward, to psychology, to manipulation, to the subtle ways predators isolate and rewrite reality. Craig didn't just allegedly kill Angela. He created a story where he was a hero, where Angela was unwell, where the new women were saviors. But the illusion had shattered. Craig's control was unraveling. Every witness, every letter, every text made one thing clear. Behind the smiles and surgical gloves was a man who needed to dominate the story at all costs, even if it meant rewriting love, even if it meant murder. And the jury? They were beginning to see not just the killer, but the performance, the role-playing, the orchestration. Because James Craig didn't want freedom. He wanted applause. And now, the curtains were starting to fall. Most killers go silent after crime. James Craig didn't. While awaiting trial inside a Colorado jail, James Craig was still plotting. The courtroom had already seen the smooth-talking dentist, the grieving husband, the lover juggling multiple affairs. But what came next peeled back the final mask. It started with a letter, 11 pages, smuggled from his cell, a desperate manifesto written in Craig's own hand, addressed to another inmate, someone he thought he could trust. It was more than a letter. It was a blueprint. In that scrawled document, Craig detailed a plan to reshape the narrative of Angela's death. He would recruit witnesses, plant stories, bribe officials, and the centerpiece of the plan, frame Angela as suicidal. His opening lines pleaded innocence, claiming he'd been unjustly accused. But within paragraphs, the mask slipped. Craig wasn't planning a defense. He was orchestrating deception from behind bars. And he was willing to pay $20,000 per fabricated witness. No detail too small. No script too far-fetched. He even described the kind of witnesses he wanted. Women between 25 and 45, attractive, confident, believable. He wanted them to say they'd had affairs with him, that Angela had found out, that she'd spiraled into suicidal despair. He wanted the jury to see Angela as unstable in him as the misunderstood husband. He wasn't just rewriting the story. He was casting it like a director. Craig's letter gave free rein to his co-conspirators. I'd rather have you do what seems natural than stick rigidly to a plan I devised. He offered burner phones, cover stories, and even dental services for the mother of one participant. This wasn't just manipulation. It was bribery, fraud, and obstruction, all committed while in custody. One inmate testified that Craig approached him in the jail's medical unit, offering him a hand-drawn map of his own home. The plan? Break in. Plan a forged journal that made Angela appear suicidal. Create physical evidence of her alleged mental state. The inmate claimed he destroyed the map within minutes, disturbed by the sheer audacity. But the damage was done. The scheme was out in the open. Another inmate came forward, too, testifying that Craig talked openly about paying someone to support his version of events. He claimed Angela had asked him to purchase the poisons, that it was her idea, that he was merely the provider. It was the same twisted logic he wrote in the iPhone note, except now he was pushing others to confirm it. The prosecution didn't need to embellish. The words were all Craig's. The handwriting, the plans, the desperation, and most chilling of all, his attempt to orchestrate a murder for hire. In the letter, Craig outlined a possible solution to the biggest problem in his case, the lead detective. He offered money to take the investigator out, eliminate him, silence the testimony, and end the trail of evidence. It wasn't just about escaping justice anymore. It was about erasing anyone who could prove his guilt. That letter had been hidden under Craig's bunk, discovered in a covert search after an inmate's ex-wife tipped off authorities. Every detail checked out. The names, the threats, the offers, all matched timelines, messages, and surveillance. In court, the defense scrambled to challenge the credibility of these jailhouse witnesses. They painted them as drug users, opportunists, unreliable narrators. But the story was bigger than any single inmate's testimony, because the letter existed, the map existed, the iPhone note existed, and they all pointed in one direction, toward James Craig's mind, still scheming in the shadows. The man who prosecutors say poisoned his wife, then texted love notes to his mistress, was now allegedly plotting from a jail cell. Not just his innocence, but the destruction of evidence, of reputations, and of justice itself. And then came the final blow. 2 women from dating apps, unrelated to the Texas dentist or the earlier affairs, came forward. They testified about Craig's pursuit of them, how quickly things moved, how he always seemed to be spinning plates. Seduction, sympathy, self-pity. One remembered Craig talking about the movie The Purge and how to kill someone with potassium because it was undetectable. Another said he brought up life insurance. These weren't coincidences. They were patterns. The prosecution's case was evolving from a murder trial into something larger. It was now about deception on every level, control of every variable, and a man who, even behind bars, believed he could outmaneuver everyone. Craig had tried to write the ending from jail, hiring actors, forging grief, orchestrating chaos. But in doing so, he left a trail of ink and desperation that was now being read aloud to a jury. And with every page, the illusion unraveled. By week 3 of the trial, the prosecution wasn't just showing who James Craig was. They were showing how many versions of him he sold to others. The man sitting in the courtroom, stoic, composed, cuffed in silence, was once a charming dentist who knew how to work a room. He had a family, a career, a picture-perfect life. But as witnesses lined up one after the other, it became clear Craig had been living double lives, perhaps triple, and none of them ended well. It began with the Texas orthodontist, the woman who had fallen for Craig at a Las Vegas dental conference in February 2023. They'd met casually, chatting in a buffet line, but within days the text exploded. More than 4,000 messages in less than 3 weeks. Dozens of FaceTime calls, love declarations, intimacy, fast-tracked. She was finalizing a divorce of her own, vulnerable, searching, and Craig met her in that vulnerability, mirroring her pain, inventing his own. He said he was also in the middle of a divorce, that he and Angela were living separately, that his wife had mental health struggles, including previous suicide attempts. It was all fiction. In court, the orthodontist broke down. Her voice trembled as she admitted she no longer knew what was real. Her world had spun so quickly into Craig's arms, and now it had collapsed. She cried while recounting messages from Craig like, "Angela thinks I did this to her, and I would never drug you." Words that seemed sweet in the moment now echoed like warnings she hadn't heard in time. Then came the others. 2 more women, both met Craig through dating apps. Both described whirlwind flirtations, romantic attention, and subtle manipulation. One woman, who dated Craig while knowing he was married, testified that he was emotionally needy. She said he used multiple burner phones, that he made vague references to divorce, and even talked about potassium being untraceable if used to kill someone. Not exactly small talk. Another recalled Craig offering her money, gifts, lavish promises. One conversation veered into dark territory when Craig referenced The Purge, a dystopian film about legal murder, and joked about ways to kill without leaving evidence. At first, she thought it was weird humor, but after Angela's death, it no longer felt like a joke. It felt like a rehearsal. Then there was a Las Vegas prostitute. During the same dental conference where Craig wooed the Texas orthodontist, he also hired a sex worker. His alibi for Angela's murder was starting to crumble under its own weight, not just from poisoning timelines, but from his own compulsions. Because while Angela lay sick in the ICU, Craig was still spinning his web of affairs, still texting sweet nothings to women who had no idea what he'd done. In fact, during his wife's final hours, Craig was making plans with women, plans for new love, new escapes, future holidays. Promises of a life Angela would never get to finish. The prosecution painted a picture of James Craig as a man obsessed, not just with control, but with validation. One who love-bombed his mistresses, who gaslighted his wife, who wrote jailhouse letters recruiting fake lovers to take the stand, and who wanted every woman in his orbit to feed his story. A psychological profile began to emerge in court, one that echoed through every witness. Experts watching the trial noted patterns common in narcissistic personality types. Extreme idealization followed by devaluation, sudden emotional attachment, charisma weaponized. Craig seemed to craft himself into whatever image the woman in front of him desired. A supportive father, a heartbroken husband, a misunderstood romantic. And when those images no longer serve him, they were discarded. What tied all of these stories together was the timeline. The prosecution meticulously laid out the overlap. How Craig was texting "I love yous" to his mistress the same hour he was searching cyanide dosage in his dental office. How his flirtations escalated while Angela's health deteriorated. How every act of affection was, in hindsight, a distraction from something far darker. These weren't just affairs. They were escape routes. And it all pointed to motive, because Craig didn't just want Angela gone. He wanted a fresh start, a new partner, a new story, one where he wasn't the villain, one where he could still be admired, even desired. He'd even chosen a specific age range and appearance for his fake alibi witnesses, attractive women between 25 and 45. He understood optics. He wanted sympathy. And as Angela's health declined, he stopped playing husband. He became the director of a narrative, one where her death would be a tragic accident, one where he could grieve, move on, and rebuild. But as the testimony stacked, that script unraveled. The Texas orthodontist, still visibly shattered, ended her time on the stand by looking directly at Craig. He didn't return her gaze. Her heartbreak wasn't just about a failed romance. It was about being used as part of a cover-up for murder. She wasn't just another woman. She was supposed to be the next chapter in Craig's life, a life funded by insurance money, sanitized by lies, and built on the grave of his wife. In the end, she gave the jury something powerful, a first-hand look into the way Craig built illusions, how he blurred fiction and fact, and how quickly love, when weaponized by the wrong person, can become a smokescreen for murder. By the time she left the courtroom, the silence was deafening, because no matter how well Craig crafted his image, the women he left behind were no longer part of his fantasy. They were witnesses, and they were telling the truth. If the courtroom needed a smoking gun, it came in ink. By the middle of week 3, the prosecution unveiled what would become the most chilling piece of physical evidence yet. An 11-page letter, handwritten, smuggled, and damning. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters scrambled for signal. Because this wasn't just about cyanide, affairs, or browser histories anymore. This was about a murder-for-hire plot. From jail. And the author? James Craig. The letter had been hidden beneath Craig's jail bunk and discovered during a covert sweep of his cell, prompted by an inmate tip-off. Investigators had been warned by another prisoner and the prisoner's ex-wife, who reportedly received a call that Craig was trying to orchestrate his own acquittal from behind bars. They executed a search quietly, keeping other inmates unaware. What they found was worse than expected. The letter began with self-pity. Craig wrote, "I've been unjustly accused of a truly horrible crime. Thus I'm forced to fight fire with fire to clear my name and return me to my kids." But the rest of the pages were not a plea of innocence. They were instructions, a plan, a roadmap of manipulation. Step 1, recruit attractive women, again, not for romance this time, but for perjury. He wanted them to testify that they'd had affairs with him before Angela's death. The narrative? Angela discovered the cheating and fell into despair. She became suicidal. Craig was the victim of her unraveling, not the cause. Step 2, find someone to discredit the lead detective. Fabricate damaging information. Create doubt. Shift suspicion. Step 3, bribe potential witnesses. Craig didn't just suggest compensation. He put a price tag on it. "I'd like to offer $20,000 to each witness," he wrote. "You essentially have, within reason, a blank check here." And step 4, most disturbing of all, a hit. The letter outlined a proposal to neutralize the lead investigator on the case. Whether that meant violence, coercion, or threats remained unclear, but the intent was unmistakable. Craig wasn't just trying to sway testimony. He was trying to eliminate obstacles. He even suggested the creation of a forged journal from Angela, discovered after her death, that would indicate suicidal thoughts. A plant, a fabrication, one that he allegedly asked another inmate to help deliver by sneaking into his home and placing it in a specific location. Details that were said to be drawn on a hand-sketched map Craig provided. Another inmate, visibly disturbed on the stand, testified that he destroyed the map as soon as he left Craig's presence, but not before memorizing enough to inform law enforcement. He described Craig's tone not as panicked or desperate, but methodical, as though he were discussing a dental procedure. This same inmate also said Craig offered him money. Craig even claimed his wife Angela had asked him to buy poisons, that she wanted to die. The same story from the iPhone note. The same false narrative, repackaged and resold, now behind bars. The defense tried to strike back, painting the inmate as a manipulator, a drug user, someone with incentive to lie. But the man held firm. He wasn't the one writing letters. He wasn't the one scripting stories. And the letter? It was in Craig's own handwriting. Another inmate confirmed similar conversations. One described Craig as obsessed with the details of his case, asking questions about how to redirect narratives, how to make Angela look unstable. He wanted the women testifying to be believable, credible, and good-looking. A jury might believe a cheating story more if the other woman seemed worth it. It was textbook narcissism, leveraging charm, optics, and deceit for control. But there was more. The prosecution revealed that Craig had promised one jailhouse co-conspirator free dental care for his mother. He was still using what little he had left to make offers, to manipulate, to appear generous. And Craig didn't stop at letters. He used burner phones before his arrest. He used aliases on dating apps. He maintained secret accounts and hidden browsing histories. The jailhouse letter was just a culmination of a long-standing pattern of deception. To the jurors, it was no longer just about what happened to Angela. It was about who James Craig was. When no one was watching, even behind bars, he was playing chess, trying to manipulate the board. But this time, someone flipped the table. As the letter was read aloud in court, Craig's face didn't flinch. Not when the prosecutor read the line about paying witnesses. Not when the map to his home was mentioned. Not even when his offer of a blank check echoed off the courtroom walls. The silence from his side of the courtroom said everything. And as the prosecution rested for the day, the gallery sat frozen. The courtroom had heard about poison before, about arsenic, eye drops, and cyanide. But the letter wasn't chemistry. It was character, and it exposed the rot at the core of James Craig's actions. Not just a man accused of murdering his wife, but one willing to rewrite truth itself to escape justice. As the jurors filed out, one of Angela's siblings was seen whispering through tears. He still tried to kill her, even after she's gone. James Craig built his life around appearances. The polished Colorado dentist, devoted father of 6, faithful churchgoer, husband of Angela for over 2 decades. On the surface, he was the picture of community respectability. But behind that carefully curated image, behind the white coat, the family photos, the church sermons, was a man unraveling. And by the time jurors heard the final testimony, the mask had not only slipped, it had shattered. What came into focus wasn't just a murder. It was a man consumed by control, by fantasy, by power. Angela Craig had died, but that wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of something darker. Because from inside a jail cell, Craig allegedly began plotting again. Letters smuggled out, handwritten scripts, promises of bribes, and most disturbing of all, a murder-for-hire plan targeting the lead detective on the case. Jurors were handed an 11-page jailhouse manifesto, a blueprint for deception, 1 part fiction, 1 part desperation, all signed in ink with the words, "Thank you for making me and my kids the happiest people on earth." In that letter, James Craig offered $20,000 to anyone willing to testify that Angela was suicidal. He wanted fake journals planted in his home, false stories submitted to the DA, alibi witnesses, young, attractive women, who would swear under oath that they had affairs with him around Christmas of 2022, that Angela caught him, that she spiraled. But it didn't stop there. An inmate testified that Craig handed him a hand-drawn map of his house, showing where to plant the fake journal. Craig allegedly offered to pay someone to break in. Another inmate said Craig asked about fabricating a deep-fake video, one that showed Angela talking about ending her life. The audacity wasn't just shocking, it was revelatory. Because by then, prosecutors didn't just have motive, method, and opportunity. They had a character profile. A man willing to rewrite reality from behind bars. A man who tried to bury the truth under layers of false narratives, charming smiles, and burner phones. When the final witness took the stand, a detective who walked the jury through surveillance footage, browser histories, and forensic timelines, the case clicked into place. There was the pink-lidded cup, the footage of Craig mixing something in the kitchen, Angela later drinking from it. There was the search history from Craig's dental office. How long does it take to die from cyanide? Undetectable poisons. How to make a murder look like a heart attack. There were the life insurance policies, 2 of them, totaling $4 million, with Craig as the sole beneficiary. And there was a moment on hospital surveillance when Craig exited Angela's ICU room carrying something clear in his hand. Moments later, Her vitals crashed. Nurses rushed in. And Craig? He stood outside, watching. None of it fit the story he told. Not the note on his iPhone claiming Angela wanted to die. Not the explanation that she had begged him for poison. Not the statement that he didn't tell doctors because he didn't want to betray her trust. Because the facts screamed otherwise. Angela's journals, her texts, her conversations with family, her plans for the future. They all told the story of a woman trying to hold her marriage together, not someone preparing to leave this world. Her siblings testified that Angela was the most maternal person they knew. Her daughter sobbed as she described trusting her father, only to realize he was a villain in their family's nightmare. The prosecution painted a picture not just of premeditated murder, but profound betrayal. And the jurors listened. The courtroom watched. In the final moments, the lead prosecutor stepped forward and held up the pink cup. Just an ordinary blender bottle. The same kind many of us use for protein shakes. He looked at the jury and asked, "Would you ever imagine that something this ordinary could be used to destroy a family?" The room was still. The question lingered. Because the horror of the James Craig case isn't just in the poisons or the plot twists. It's in the banality of it all. A smoothie, a text message, a Google search, a dentist with a deadly secret. Angela Craig didn't die in the shadows. She died under fluorescent lights, surrounded by doctors who were trying to save her, while the man who poisoned her stood just feet away, not grieving, not confessing, just watching. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, they carried not only the evidence, but the weight of a story so chilling that it didn't feel like true crime. It felt like a psychological thriller. And if you've made it to this point in the story, you're probably still asking the same question we all are. How does someone do this? How does a man go from husband to killer, from father to manipulator, from dentist to inmate? Maybe the answer lies in his own words, tucked into that jailhouse letter, where Craig wrote, "Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." But what he underestimated is that the fire he set burned everything. Angela, her children's innocence, his reputation, and now his freedom. Because no matter how many lies he wrote, how many women he used, how many lives he tried to reshape, truth has a way of catching up. And when it does, even the best smile can't hide what's behind it. Not forever.